and advancing towards larger leadership roles. With this masterclass, we aim to provide a sneak peek into the Women's Leadership Program. And the masterclass is led by Professor Vishal Karungulam, a visiting faculty at the Indian School of Business. And he is also one of the teaching faculties of the Women's Leadership Program. Well, before I hand over the session to Professor, I would like to put forth a few ground rules. We'll be enabling the chat box in a while, so you can put down any questions that you have during the masterclass in the chat box, and you can feel free to communicate with each other also through the chat box. However, I request you all to stay on mute throughout the session. Well, that's about it. Over to you, Prof.
All right, thank you so much, Saidi. Hey, first, I just want to say thank you for everyone's patience. I know you were working through some technical difficulties. Kind of become the norm now with the hybrid world, getting ready with all of the technology. But let's jump in. So we don't have a lot of time, so we quickly jump in and we talk about the topic at hand, right? What we are here to talk about today is to give you, like Saidi was saying, we'll give you a sneak peek into one of the core modules that we teach during Women Leadership Program. And the module that we teach is called design thinking, or we also call it hypothesis-driven decision-making frameworks. But really the goal that we are going to accomplish in the next 30 to 45 minutes is to give you a sense of what are the big areas that we cover, what does it actually mean, what is it that we can get out of it, what are the big goals that we achieve, right? So that's really what we try to cover. We'll try to breeze through a lot of content. You will see that a lot of content that I'm going to talk about is probably going to just touch upon the surface of a lot of areas. We won't be going very deep, but the goal is for you to get a sense of what is it that we'll be talking about so that you know what you should expect if you decide to become a part of the Women Leadership Program. That's really the goal. So let's quickly jump in. Yeah, so the big things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about two big things today, right? The first thing we're going to talk about are methods. Think of methods as frameworks, as techniques that you will learn today or you'll get exposed to today that you can actually use in order to make a lot of important decisions. And primarily, these decisions are in the context of products that you're building, problems that you're solving, users that you want to actually help or create value for, right? So that's really what you learn in terms of techniques and frameworks. If you go back and think, there are probably a lot of instances where a lot of us have decided what we think is the problem our user has, gone ahead and solved that problem in a certain way, and then later we realize that this is actually not the problem to be solved at all. This is not a problem that the user had at all. It happens more often than we can imagine. So hopefully, in this module, you will be able to learn some tools and techniques to help you understand the various methods that you can use to overcome that problem, right? To overcome this whole approach of not knowing what's the right problem to solve or picking the wrong problem to solve, right? So that's really the methods. We'll also explore some mindsets, because if you have to figure out what is the real problem that your user has, it's very essential that we have a certain kind of mindset. The mindset is really called the beginner's mindset, where you don't assume anything. You always go into a conversation with the thinking that you are there to discover, with the thinking that you are going into the conversation to understand what exactly is it that the user needs, right? So what is the kind of mindset that you have? We'll talk about that later. So really, you'll talk about methods and mindset. That's really what we're going to do. But before this, I have a quick question, right? So, and I'll open a poll in just a second. But really, if you actually look at this picture, it's a very interesting picture. It's not a picture that I have, but it's a picture that has been curated by somebody else. But you can actually see on the left, there is a picture that's depicting the number of companies or startups that were there in the Web 2.0 area. That's in the year 2005. On the right, you actually see the same picture as of 2009, but you see a bunch of crosses. And a bunch of crosses really represent the companies that did not exist. And if you go back and look at statistics on the number of startups that actually survive and the number of startups that fail, you will realize that majority of the startups don't continue and don't become successful. But the question is, why do they fail? Why do these startups fail, right? So that's a question that keeps coming up again and again. So for that, what I want to do is I want to open up a poll, okay? I want to open a poll so that you can actually answer this question on why do startups fail. So let me open this first poll. Let me launch this poll and see this. I'm hoping that the poll is launched. I've launched the poll. Hopefully you can all see it. Failed. 1 second. There's a problem with launching the poll. Okay. Yeah, now the poll is launched. So all of you can hopefully see the poll. Why don't you go and answer this question? Why do startups fail in general? Why do they fail in general? Is it because they run out of cash? Is it because they get outcompeted? Is it because they have pricing challenges as far as their product is concerned? Or is it that they don't have market need for that product? Why is it that a lot of startups end up failing? What is the main reason why these startups fail? Is it because they're running out of cash? Or maybe the competition just took over and they couldn't keep pace with the competition? Maybe they didn't know how to price their product? Or was there some other problem? Was there something else that was happening that there was no market? What was actually happening? What is the reason? Yeah, what is the reason? So we're going to open it for maybe just another 3-4 seconds, and then we'll end the poll. Okay, then we'll end the poll. And I'll show you the results in just 2 seconds. So some of you are still voting. I'll still wait for more of you to vote. Because as you're voting, I can see the numbers are kind of swaying. So maybe I'll just wait for some more time. I'll just wait for another second and see if you have more people who are voting. No, it seems to have stagnated. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to end the poll right here. And I'm going to hopefully be able to show you the answers that you gave. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'm going to end the poll. Yes, I'm going to share the results. So you will see the results. There you see results, right? So this is the result that all of you actually polled on. So about 3% of you said that startups fail because they run out of cash. About 33% of you say that they are outcompeted. 8% of them are saying that they might be pricing challenges. But 56% of you, majority of you are saying it's because there's no market need for the product, right? This is spot on. This is actually really, really, really good. The insight is very, very meaningful because if you actually think about why do software startups fail, and there's a lot of research that's been conducted. And this is just one research that CB Insights has conducted, which shows very clearly that 42% actually came back with research to say that no market need is the reason why startups fail. The top reason why startups fail is because there is no market, right? So which kind of resonates with the answers that you gave as well as a group, right? So very clearly, one of the top reasons why companies are not able to stay afloat, they're not able to compete in the market, they're not able to be successful is because there is no market need for that product. But the question is, how do we overcome this problem? Like the overwhelming number of companies still continue to fail, and the majority of them are failing because there is no market need. Why is it that they are failing? Why is it that they are not able to build the right product? Why is it that they don't have a market need for the product that they're building? In order to overcome that problem, we have to think about what is the right problem to solve in a very structural manner. And design thinking kind of provides you a framework which helps you think about that structure. And that's the structure we're going to explore a little bit, right? So there are many ways in which you can actually figure out what is the right problem. Hypothesis-driven thinking or design thinking is really one way in which you can achieve the same result, right? And we'll talk about design thinking. So if you look at it, the framework that we're going to use in order to understand who is the customer, what is the problem that we have to solve for the customer, is it the right problem, how do I validate it, what are the various ways in which I can solve the problem, and how do I validate the solution that I'm building. The framework that we're going to use is a very simple framework. We're going to say, look, we're going to start with ideation. Everything starts with ideation, hypothesis building, assumption formulation. Then we will actually go and experiment where we try and find out that the assumptions that we've made, if they are the right assumptions or not, are these assumptions meaningful for customers or not? Is customer really coming back or user coming back and saying that the assumption that you had is the actual problem that they had or not? Then we learn from these experiments. We'll get the data. We'll understand what is actually happening as a part of these experiments. And finally, we'll iterate. So in the experiment, if the data that you gathered, the results are actually showing that the assumption that you had was invalidated, then you go back and recreate your assumption. But in the event that your assumption is validated through your results, then you go to the next, right? So you do this framework both to validate the problem that the user has and to find out what is the right solution. So the framework is rather simple. You come up with the assumptions, you take your assumptions and you experiment. You run your experiment so that you understand from users on whether your assumptions are meaningful or not. Once you have a sense of whether your assumption is meaningful or not to your result, you decide whether you want to iterate and come back and redo your assumption, or do you want to move the next. Right? That's really the framework that we want to follow. So with that framework to be followed, let's first start with understanding problems. The core question is, how do we know what are the problems that get solved, right? So we're always trying to find out what is the right problem to get solved. Because no market need essentially means we are solving a problem that doesn't exist for the user. So how do we think about what is the right problem that needs to be solved? In order to do that, the approach that we're going to use is we're going to start empathizing with our user. Empathy is really, it's talked about as walking in the customer's shoes. It's really about understanding your customer's perspective. It's understanding your user, where they are coming from, what are the goals, what are their motivations, what are their attitudes and mental models, and then figuring out a way for you to empathize with that user so that you can truly understand the real problems that the user has. Then you define these problems, just as we spoke about in the form of an assumption formulation. And then you take this assumption, you validate that assumption to make sure that this is actually an important problem for the user. So that's kind of the framework that we follow. So first thing is to empathize. But how do you empathize with the user? It's very hard. It's very hard to empathize with the user. And in order to do that, we're going to probably do a quick poll. Okay, so let me open up one more poll and I'll have you answer this. So let me launch this poll. Hopefully we launch the poll very soon. Let me see, it's trying to launch it. Hopefully it will come. Hopefully it's coming now. It's trying to take a little bit of time to launch the poll. I'm going to give it a shot again. Yeah. Oh, the poll is launched. Okay. This poll essentially has 3 questions. Okay, 3 questions. The first question, I want all of you to answer these questions. First question is, have you traveled to at least 3 states within India? The answer is yes or no. It's a very simple yes or no poll question. Yes, I have traveled. No, I have not traveled. And the second question is essentially to say, can you speak at least 2 languages, English being one of those languages, right? So can you actually speak 2 languages, English being one of those languages? The third question that we have is to say, look, do you consume more content on OTT than on traditional TV or cable networks, right? So how do you consume your content? So we're just trying to get a sense of the class on how do you actually do this. Hopefully some interesting patterns will emerge and we'll have a conversation. Okay, we'll have a conversation. Let's just give it maybe just another 2 or 3 seconds. I can see people are still answering. I'll just give it another 2 or 3 seconds for people to answer. I think more people are answering, so let's just give it another second. And then I'll end the poll and I'll share the results with you and we'll be able to see them. Okay. All right. So it's been a minute, so I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results. Right? Interesting results. If you actually see, almost 100% of the people who answered, or 96% of you who answered the poll, have actually said you've traveled to at least 3 states within India. 100% of you have said that you can speak at least 2 languages, English being one of them. And about 87% of you are saying that you consume more content over OTT than on traditional television. Now, if you think about it, if I ask the same 3 questions for the rest of the Indian population, the 1.4 billion Indians that are around, do you think we will get the same numbers? I don't think so. I think the percentage of Indians who travel to at least 3 states is definitely less than 96%. Those who can speak at least 2 languages, English being one of them, is definitely less than 100%. Same is the case with the number of people who are consuming content over OTT than on traditional TV. It's definitely less than 87%. I think in some of these questions, the numbers will be extremely, extremely different from what has come up in the poll that we've just conducted, right? So if you think about it, as much as all of us like to believe that we are all very diverse and we are all distinct, the truth is we are very different from the people for whom we are trying to solve the problem. We are actually not our own users. A lot of times we're very tempted to believe that if I have a problem, everybody else should have the problem. That's not necessarily true. It may be true in some cases, it's not necessarily true always. Which means it's very important for us to understand and internalize that we have to build for the users and not for us. That's the most important thing for us to be very cognizant of. Because a lot of times we think that if I have a problem, others must have it. But that's not necessarily true. Because your users are very, very different from you. They have different set of problems. They have different goals. They have different motivations. They work in different environments. So what they need is very different from what we need, right? So it's important for us to understand we are not our users and we need to build for our users, not for ourselves. But how do we do this? How do we go about doing this? Because the gap that you have between your users for the solutions that you're creating or the products that you're building and the people who are actually building these solutions can actually be very, very large. If you think about it, maybe what your user wants is not translated very meaningfully, is not relatable for the people who are actually building the product. So how do we bridge that gap? The way you bridge the gap is by building personas, right? You build something called as personas. What are personas? Personas are essentially models of multiple users who have similar goals and similar behavior that you're creating in order for you to empathize with that particular user. right? Personas help bring empathy back to the product development of solution building. How does it happen? How does persona help you? It helps you do this because through personas, what you're able to do is you're able to put a name to a model. You're able to bring together multiple users, their behaviors, their goals. They have similar mental models. You're bringing all of these different user characteristics together, and you're creating an archetype. You're creating a model of your particular user. And to empathize with that user, to make it very real, because it's a model, it's not a real person. How do you take a model and make it real? You give them a name, you give them some kind of fictitious face, you have a quote that defines who they are, you have a descriptor, and you write about their profile, who it is, what is their demographic, what is their earning potential, what is their spending potential. You have some information about who they are, right? So that's what you're trying to do in order for you to kind of develop a little bit of it. So those are all characteristics that you have when you're developing persona. But what's also important and interesting when you're talking about persona as opposed to a market segment, if you think about a market segment, you typically talk about demographics of the user. Persona differs from a market segment because apart from demographics, you're also making sure that you're catering in the goals of the user, the motivations that the user has, the attitudes that they have, the mental model that they have, their behaviors, their pain points. You're trying to understand all of these different aspects and you're trying to get very granular about your user, so that you can make meaningful decisions on saying what are the right problems you want to tackle. So if you don't understand the user at a fairly granular level, you're probably going to be very generic and you will not be able to solve real critical value added problems for the particular user segment that you're going after. Which is why it's important that apart from having a segmentation for your user, you need to start understanding more granular nuances like their goals, their motivations, their attitudes, their mental models, what are their behaviors, what are the pain points, what environments do they operate in. All of these things become really important for you to kind of build a persona, right? To summarize, what are personas? Personas are an archetype, like you said, they're a model of a group of users who have similar goals and success. Personas help you explain what is most important so that you can understand and relate to the user community that you're solving for. And personas are not anyone's opinion. It's not something that you sit in a room and you decide that this is the persona I'm catering to. They're actually developed through extensive field studies. You need to talk to multiple users, you need to find out what they are saying, you have to understand their stories and emotions, and you have to bring them together and build a persona, right? So as you can see, this is a very high level understanding of what a persona is and why a persona is important. Obviously, in the class, in the module, we go much deeper into persona building. We talk about various techniques of how do you think about personas, how do you actually get granular in persona, what's important, what's not important, how do you prioritize, how do you not prioritize, what do you do about the problems that there are multiple personas, how do you think about solving for all of these different personas differently. So we talk about all of these aspects in more detail in the module, right? So, but to get a sense of it, the first step is for you to be able to empathize with your users, and personas help you empathize with the users, right? So that's what is important. In the next section, when we talk about the problem, we'll also talk about the field study mechanism or qualitative techniques in which you can actually understand your user and their goals and motivations and problems better. That is also a technique where you will spend the time needed to do the field study to understand your persona, right? So that's really how you think about persona. The next step, once you're able to empathize your user, the next step is to define the problem. Now that you have a sense of who your user is, what their motivations and attitudes are, we need to get to a place where we actually understand what are the problems that they're going on. In order to understand the problem, let's take an example. Let's take a simple example and work through that example. Let's say we're picking an example of someone who's traveling to a country where they don't know the local language. Okay, let's assume that there was a person who's traveling to another country where they don't know the local language. And in order to understand what problems they might have, the thing we are going to do is something called an experience. Okay, your user experience. And the way we'll do that is something like this. I'm going to draw this out and hopefully you're able to see it. There is a y-axis and there is an x-axis. I'm going to make the y-axis longer. And this is the neutral point. Yeah, this is 0, 0 point, if you actually think about it. The y-axis is called the experience axis. Okay, this is the experience axis. Experience gets better on top, which means here I have a neutral experience at 0, 0. But as I go up, my experience starts getting better and better, right? So it's an improved experience. It's an improved experience. My experience is much better. I'm feeling much better. But whereas in the negative side, you will see is where I have a negative experience. The experience is very bad. I'm very unhappy. I'm not satisfied with what is actually happening. The x-axis is a time axis. If you think about it, this is where the scenario or the situation that you're trying to draw the experience map for starts. That's your neutral point, 0, 0. And the end is really where the experience ends. It's T, right? So this is really where your experience is ending. If this is the graph, I'll take an example of a user, of a persona, and I'll draw an experience map for you as an example. And we'll talk about, with that experience map, how will you find out what are the potential problems you need to go on. Mind you, this experience map technique can be done for any problem, for any scenario that you have. It doesn't have to be only a product building scenario. You can pick any scenario of any user and you can draw an experience map for it, right? And that will give you a sense of what are the areas you need to tackle in terms of problems. How do you formulate the hypothesis? What are the value add problems? So let's think about an experience of someone who is, let's say the persona is someone who's traveling to another country for medical tourism. They're probably traveling to another country because they want to get treated in that country. Okay, they're going to get treated in that country. There's no cure in their own country, so they want to go to another country and they want to get treated. If that's the persona you're going after, the whole journey for this persona starts from the time of discovery of their ailment all the way into post-operative care and then getting completely healed. Right? So it's a very broad kind of journey. But for the purposes of this discussion, we will limit the scenario to a very small part of this entire journey. And let's say we're picking only the part of the journey where this persona is trying to travel to another country, which means, they have a flight coming up, they're going to get on the flight, they're going to get into the new country, and then they're going to meet the doctor. Let's say that's the part of the overall journey that we are trying to model and draw the experience for. So this experience all starts with, maybe this persona is first getting ready to travel. So think about it. Air travel is stressful. Any travel is stressful. Air travel more so. And this person is actually going for medical tourism reasons. So maybe they have more stress than usual, right? So their experience is not that great, slightly negative side. But then they reach the airport on time. Let's say they're traveling to the airport, they reach the airport on time, and they're maybe doing a little better. They know that the flight is on time, they've reached on time, they have enough time on their hands, so they're feeling a little better. Now, let's say they got onto the flight took off, and after the flight took off, let's say the air hostess recognized that you needed some help and maybe they provided extra help for you. Maybe they bumped you up to business class and now your experience is slightly starting to get better, right? So you're feeling a little better. You're like, okay, this is great. I'm having more comfort. People are taking care of me. And then eventually your flight ends and you land at the airport. Once you land at the airport, there was someone who was supposed to come and receive you. Maybe for this persona, someone who was supposed to come and receive did not show up. If they didn't show up, obviously now they're getting stressed. Now they don't know what to do. Yeah. So they were expecting someone, they're going to this country, they don't know the language, no one showed up, so they're getting worked up. Now they're frantically searching for someone's phone number, this person was supposed to come, their contact details, their email address, they don't find anything. Now they're working up a little more, right? They're getting worried a lot more. 15 minutes passes, 30 minutes passes, someone shows up and says, hey, I'm really sorry, I was supposed to come and pick you up earlier, I got stuck in traffic and I was not able to meet you. And now they're slowly starting to feel better. Right? And this person then takes them to the hotel room. The hotel room is really nice. They get settled there. Next morning he comes, he picks them up and they take them to the hospital and they meet the doctor. The doctor knows their local language and the doctor gives them all the assurance that things are going to be okay and they're going to get treated, right? So now they start to feel a little better. So now if you actually look at it, their experience graph looks something like this. In the scenario scope that we spoke about, looks something like this. Yeah. So that's the kind of experience graph that they have. The goal for us is to identify what are called the low points in the journey. You actually see there are points in the journey where their experience was bad, and the points in their customer experience journey where they had a bad experience present opportunities of problems that we can solve. That's the reason you do this experience mapping exercise, right? So one way to formulate a problem hypothesis, in many ways that we will explore to formulate problem hypothesis. One way to formulate a problem hypothesis is by drawing a customer journey map and identifying the low points of the journey. Okay, I highly encourage all of you to pick a scenario of your choice, start drawing out experience maps and see what are the low points. Right? So those are good ways for you to kind of think about where is the problem that the user potentially has. But mind you, all of this experience map is something that you are doing. You still don't know if the user actually has this problem or not. That is why we are saying that when you find these low points in the journey that you have drawn, these are problem assumptions. These are hypotheses. They are not necessarily real problems that you have to solve. Right? So that's the idea. So in this scenario, there can be many, many types of users. The example that I gave you is an example of someone who's traveling for medical tourism, but you can think of many kinds of users. Let's say you can think of users who are students, who are traveling in order to, maybe study abroad, or you can think of people who are actually relocating because of their work, or you can think of people who are actually going for, pilgrimage reasons. So that's another example that you can think of, or you can think of people who are actually traveling just for leisure purposes, right? So people who are actually trying to holiday. So there are multiple kinds of users that you can think of for the scenario of going to another country where they don't know. So each one will have a different journey. Each one will have a different low point, and you need to figure out these low points, and those can be opportunities of problem. And same way, you can think of multiple goals that they have. Someone who's going for medical tourism, maybe their goal is that they want to get healthy. That's the goal that they have. Someone who's traveling for leisure or holiday purposes, maybe they just want to relax. That could be an example. Or maybe they're all traveling not for relaxation, or relaxation is one part of the goal, but maybe their goal is that they want to learn about the local culture. Maybe they want to learn about the culture. Maybe that is their goal. They want to explore new cultures. They want to learn more about what's happening in the culture. You can think of people who are actually going, relocating for work. They want to basically make sure that they're successful in their career. Maybe that's their goal. So they have multiple goals. The people have multiple goals that you can think of. So you can think of multiple goals. And in the course, we will actually explore the techniques of how do you think about goals of these. Because there are ways in which you can think of goals. There are actions the users perform. There are real goals that the users have. And it's important for us to hone in on what is the real goal. Because only if you understand the goal, can you actually know what is the problem that might be there for that goal, right? So without understanding the goals, you won't be able to understand what are the core problems that they have. So there are various techniques and frameworks that you can apply in order to understand what are the goals that the users have. So we try to understand those goals. And once you have a sense of the goals and you have a sense of the low points in the journey, what you need to do is you need to come up and formulate a problem hypothesis, which is, hey, listen, a particular customer type that you had, maybe a student, maybe someone who's actually going for medical tourism, is unable to achieve a particular goal that they set out for themselves. In our example of medical tourism, their goal is to get healthy because they have a problem. And the problem in this case could be that because they did not know, to get very granular in the airport example, because they did not have the contact details of the person who was coming to pick them up. So maybe they were not intimated about the delay that could be possible. So these are all problem hypotheses that you have, right? So what is the problem hypothesis that you're formulating is something you need to do. Once you have a sense of the problem hypothesis, next step is for you to validate. How do you validate this now? You have a problem hypothesis, but how do you validate this hypothesis? You validate it both qualitatively and quantitatively, right? You validate it qualitatively through interviews. You validate it quantitatively through other methodologies like surveys and secondary research. So we'll talk about that. So how do you do it qualitatively? The way you do it qualitatively is through doing customer interviews. There are many nuances to actually how do you do user interviews, right? We can talk about many nuances of doing user interviews. But here is a model that's been adopted from a person called Michael Barry, which talks about how do you actually do an interview conversation. The way you do an interview conversation typically is on three principles. First, you have to be human because you have to understand you're talking to humans, you're not talking to machines, right? So there are emotions involved, there are stories involved. It's very important for us to seek those stories and we have to talk about the feelings that they have. Because only if you talk about the stories and the feelings that they have, you'll actually be able to understand their motivations, their true goals, the environment that they operate in, the mental models that they have, what attitude do they actually portray. So you'll be able to understand your user a lot more deeply to be able to understand their problem. Here's how a typical interview kind of happens. When you start, you interview yourself, you interview what you're going to talk to them about, you build some rapport, but you get their stories and emotions. That's the high point of the interview. Very, very important. Then you ask follow-up questions and then you wrap up, right? So there are again multiple techniques of how do you interview users, how do you talk to your users, how do you truly validate qualitatively, and we'll explore those in detail in the module, right? But this is kind of giving you a sense of the qualitative way to think about it. Once you do that validation, you may realize that what you have as a problem statement is in fact validated, or it may be invalidated. If it's invalidated, you will come back and you will reframe the problem. You will go back and relook at your assumption and maybe change the assumption a little bit using the same framework that we had in terms of how do you frame the problem, right? How do you actually write the problem? Once you do your qualitative assessment, you have a sense of, okay, I get a sense that what the problems are. You will then go into quantitative assessment. You can do them through surveys. You can do multiple technical research techniques, which we can explore further in class. But the goal is for you to combine both qualitative and quantitative data to get a sense of whether the problem is a real problem or not, or how important is the problem. So that's the validation technique of problem. Once you have a sense of the problem, the next step is for us to go and figure out what are the solutions. How do you go solve this problem, right? And for that, we'll come back to the same framework. We'll ideate, we'll define, and we'll validate, right? So we'll ideate on the solution, we will define the solution, and validate the solution. How do you ideate and define? Everything starts with an idea, as the name says. It's fairly simple. You think about what are the ideas, what are the ways in which you can solve them. You come up with multiple ideas. The goal is for you to brainstorm. The goal is not for you to come up with practicalities. The goal is for you to come up with quantities. You come up with as many ideas as you can. Come up with quantity and not quality. Once you come up with all of that, you can segregate all of your ideas. And there are frameworks and tools again to segregate the ideas. You can impose some constraints. You can rank the ideas. And then you figure out what are the top ideas that you want to explore for. Right? So we talk about a lot of these techniques in one day. Once you have a sense of what are the most important ideas, you can actually expand on your ideas and start drawing storyboards for it. They're typically like a comic strip which has 3 to 9 panels. We have simple drawings which first talks about what's the problem the user has. If the user has this problem, what have they tried and failed? What is the solution that you're proposing? How will they discover that solution? What happens if they use that solution? How is it going to impact their life? So these are typically the elements that are there. But storyboards are extremely visually powerful mechanisms for you to go back to your user and say, here is an idea that I have to solve your problem. Does it actually work? Does it not work? What works and what doesn't work? How else would you change it? What are the constraints that you're missing? What are the problems that you've not tried to tackle? So it's important for you to kind of have that dialogue with the user to validate a storyboard. Remember, if you're taking a storyboard to your user, you've still actually not spent a lot of effort and energy. You've not built anything, you've not used resources, you've not used capacity, you've not used finances. So these are just drawings that you're taking to the user to validate your idea, right? You're still trying to make sure that you're minimizing the risk that your solution doesn't work. So those are called storyboards. So when we explore a lot of these techniques, storyboards. And once you do that, you can come back and frame the solution hypothesis, right? The solution hypothesis that you validated, which essentially says you have a particular solution which is useful to a user because they're trying to achieve a goal and they're able to overcome a problem, right? So that's kind of how you think about a solution hypothesis. And finally, you need to validate the solution hypothesis. In order for you to validate the solution hypothesis, again, it's qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative is the same. We spoke about the interviews. This time you take your storyboard, you take your ideas, you go have a conversation with the user to go find out if this is something that's meaningful. Does it work? Does it not work? What value does it provide? What is the feedback that the user is giving? You gather all the feedback, right? So that's qualitative. What you can do after you do storyboarding is you can take it to the next level. You can say, look, I'm going to build some wireframes. I'm going to build some code prototypes. Wireframes essentially are mechanisms in which you can do more detailed design of the particular product that you're building. Let's say that you're building a software app. You can actually start drawing the screens of that app. Nowadays, there are lots of software which help you do this. You don't need to do it on paper. And you can take all of these diagrams, wireframes, and put them together. You can actually wire them together and give it to the user so they can start using it and they can start using it. These are really methods in which you can understand deeper level user interaction for the solution that you're proposing. And then you have this whole idea of prototypes. Yeah, you can think of multiple kinds of prototypes. But prototypes essentially have to be easily testable and usable. And prototypes don't necessarily add value to user, but they add a lot of value to you because prototypes are something that you're giving to the user so that they can try and test, but you're trying to learn as much as possible from them on saying what's working and what's not working in the solution that you're. The next step to a prototype, once you're able to validate your solution and say this is useful, it looks like the users will use it, is what you create as an MVP. So MVP, as it's a very popular term, often used term, sometimes misused term. But really the idea is for you to be able to build a minimum version of your product, but make sure it's valuable enough for the user so that both you as the product builder or the solution creator and the user and the customer both have value. The user is able to derive value from the solution that you've given them. You're deriving value in terms of learning as much as possible, right? So that's really how you think of an MVP. The goal is for you to ship multiple MVPs because really, until and unless you ship it early and often to your user, you don't know how the user is going to use your product. That is the true test. That's the true solution validation that you're getting. You may have validated the problem. It's a very important step. But to validate the solution, you may have done storyboarding, you've gone and done a lot of prototyping. It minimizes your risk. But once you start building your MVPs and start putting it out in the market, you will truly understand how the user is using it. Then you'll be able to iteratively improve on your product. So that's really the goal of an MVP. Right? So when we talk about these techniques, there are multiple techniques to prototyping an MVP. Which is again, essentially if your MVP gets invalidated, you come back and reframe the solution and then you go back to square one and start the whole process. So if you think about it, this is fairly rushed and we did it really, really fast. But if you actually think about what we did, in the last, 35, 40 minutes, we actually spoke about multiple techniques of design. We spoke about assuming a business beginner's mindset, which is always trying to discover what the true problems of the user are, rather than assuming we know what the problems are. We spoke about how do you interview for empathy so that you listen to understand and not listen to respond, right? We spoke about that a little bit. We spoke about reframing techniques. so that you can always course correct in the event that any one of your assumptions gets invalidated. We spoke about ideating, brainstorming techniques in order to find answers, what are the right kind of solution. And we spoke about this whole iterative framework of being able to seek feedback and continuously improve. And we spoke about testing and validating the idea to prototypes, to making sure that they're building the right kind of MVP, and we're getting to market early enough. Like I said, this is just to kind of give you a very, very high level sense of what are the things that we talk about in the class, and to give you a sense of design thinking overall at a very high level. But the goal is for you to get an understanding of the various tools and techniques that will be part of the design thinking module, which will be explored much, much deeper in the class. Right? So those are really the big things that I had to cover. With that, I think I'll hand it over to Sahiti. Yeah, Sahiti, over to you.
Yeah, Prof. Thank you so much. It was indeed a very lovely session, and I thoroughly enjoyed the polls. The session is now open for question and answers. So if you have any questions related to the topic, you can drop them in the chat box and Prof will be open to taking it.
Yeah, I can see some of the chats they were during the conversation, but please feel free to go and put in your questions on the chat and try to answer to the best of my ability. We'll see if there is a specific one.
Meanwhile, I would like to share a little video that would give all of you an overview about what the Women's Leadership Program encompasses. Give me a moment to play the video.
We at ISD strongly believe that equality of access and opportunity is appropriate, desirable, and even necessary. Organizations who imbibe this value thrive and outperform their competitors on multiple levels. Yet, in India, 5 to 7% of senior managers are women, and they occupy less than 3% of board chairs. In that context, we thought it's necessary and very important to create a program that helps women advance their careers in organizations and build diverse workplaces themselves.
Thank you for watching, everyone. Give me a minute. We have a couple of questions in the chat box Q&A section, Prof. Shruti Sharma is asking, what's the major difference between product thinking and design thinking? You're on mute, Prof.
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I can see the question now. Yeah, what's the major difference between product thinking and design thinking? Look, design thinking is a framework which helps you have more user centricity in the sense that it helps you understand what exactly is the problem that the user has, what is the right way to solve the problem, how do you think about it from a user first manner. Product thinking builds on design thinking in a lot of ways. Product thinking essentially says, yes, I need to understand what's the right problem to solve. I need to understand who my users are and what is the right solution. But product thinking is a lot more than that. It's not just about solving the right problem, but it's also about the business sense that comes associated with it. It's also about how do I launch the product? It's about how do I grow the product? It's about how do I monetize the product? It's about how do I measure performance of the product? A lot of these things encompass product thinking, right? So product thinking in some sense builds on top of design thinking, but design thinking is more like first principles, base level frameworks that you need to have, on top of which product thinking builds on top, right? Because it's got multiple other elements on top of design thinking. So that's what product thinking is. There's another question. Yeah, I can see the other question. Because what's the connection between wicked problem and design thinking? I'll be honest with you, I don't know what wicked problem is. So I don't know if I'll be able to answer that question. If Rajeshwaran, if you have a more clearer version of the question, you can let me know, because I don't really know what you mean by wicked problem. I think, Sahiti, there's a question on
Yeah.
webinar chat also.
Yeah, so I think Uma is asking a question that Six Sigma problem solving tools also advocate design thinking, philosophy, customer centricity. What is design thinking different? How is design thinking different?
Yeah, so Six Sigma is a lot about optimization. If you think about Six Sigma, it's a lot about optimization. It's about finding the root cause of the problem and iteratively solving the problem. Absolutely, those elements are the same, right? A lot of design thinking elements and Six Sigma elements are very similar also. But design thinking specifically is a lot about user centricity. You're coming from a user perspective, you're keeping user at the center of it, and you're spending a lot of time in understanding granularly what is it that gets the user to tick, what is the value that they need, what exactly are the users' pain points, behaviors, goals, motivation. In that sense, design thinking actually keeps the user at the center of it. While Six Sigma is also keeping the user, it's a lot about process. It's a lot about making sure that the process continues to improve. So that's one of the differentiations that you can think of as far as Six Sigma and design thinking. But look, at a fundamental level, all of them are trying to improve something by making sure that the goals are clear and you're iteratively getting the progress, right? So those kind of things are simple.
Nupur Agarwal is asking, can we also learn how to create the need? The problem still exists, but may not be the need initially for the product.
So Nupur, the way to think about it is, I can't see the question, but let me answer the question, right? So I think your question is, can you repeat the question again?
So she wants to know how she can create the need, because even if the problem exists, it may not be the need initially for the product.
So here is the thing, right? If the problem actually exists, someone's either solving the problem or the problem is not being solved. One of the two is correct. And if the problem is not being solved, then you have a clear opportunity and the need is very clear, right? So the way you think about it is, if the problem is real and if the problem is important enough and large enough, then the need is real and you can go solve it. But in the event that the problem is being solved, but it's being solved suboptimally, as an example, right? It's being solved suboptimally, then there is an opportunity for you to improve that optimization and make it more valuable. That's the way you kind of think about it, right? So that's how you think about it. But I see there's one more point that you're trying to make, Nupur, which is the problem is not being solved because users don't acknowledge. This is an interesting one. Look, if the user is not acknowledging the problem, then in some sense, the question is, do they really have that problem? If they have the problem, then why are they not acknowledging the problem? That's the question you need to think about, right? So you have to think about what is the actual problem that they have. And what is the goal that they're trying to meet? Look, it's important for you to understand that all problems they have are in context of a goal. So it's important for you to kind of understand that goal and then figure out what is the problem that they have. The example that you're taking of addiction is an interesting problem. It's not necessarily a simple product problem, but it's much more complicated because there are other factors that influence this problem, right? So in those kind of situations, the need may not get validated by the specific user who has that problem. It might get validated by other stakeholders who are impacted by that problem. If you think about something like addiction, maybe there are multiple other stakeholders who are impacted by the problem. They might acknowledge the problem, and maybe through them you can create the need, right? So that's another way to kind of think about
it. There's another question, Prof. Would you like to take it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to see. This is the big problem I experienced is during need finding all stakeholders are not involved due to limited understanding, but input comes after or during product launch. Yeah. So this is an interesting one, right? So you're basically saying, look, after you launch, people will come back and tell you, oh, you shouldn't have done it this way, you should have done it some other way. The way to solve these things, and there are multiple ways to solve it. Obviously, there are processes that you can put in place and you can make sure that the right stakeholders are involved at the right time. But one of the things that is very useful is for you to always keep the user in the center. If you're saying that all conversations are structured around your user and around the core stakeholder that you're trying to build the product for, then it becomes a prioritization conversation. It's not a conversation of should you do it or should you not do it. It's a question of when should you, right? So if you pivot the conversation by making it user-centric, instead of actually everyone having an opinion, you say, look, here is the data, here is the design backing, here is what we've done, here is the research. which is why we decided that this is the most important problem for the user to be solved in a particular way. I don't think there are a lot of conflicts. Most times people have conflicts because they feel like they know something that you don't know. But if you have actually backed yourself through research by showing the work that you've put in with the data to actually say what you're solving for is a real customer problem, most people will not debate it. They might give you input, which you can always take, and you can always say how you can improve and course correct. But the truth is, if you make it user centric, very little chance of conflict arising.
Thank you, Prof. I'm sure there are more questions, but because of the time constraint, will have to move on. So we'll now talk a little more about the program. We have Abhishek Bhushan on the panel with us. He's the program advisor for Women's Leadership Program, and he'll give you a little overview about the program and walk you through the admission process. Over to you, Abhishek.
Thank you. Thank you, Saiti. Thanks, Prof, for the wonderful session. So as Saiti rightly mentioned, so we have an upcoming program catered to women leaders, and the program name is Women Leadership Program. So the duration of this program is 11 weeks, which includes both live virtual and on-campus sessions. And this program is starting from February 2, and it will end till April 15th. And basically the program covers 4 modules particularly. So one is the executive presence and communication. The second is personal leadership. The third module which we are going to cover is organization leadership and influence as well. And the fourth is driving business results. Apart from that, if you talk about the key features about what this program caters, is definitely the leadership perspective, and we are also giving you the executive presence as well in this. So if you want to know more about this program, so you can drop us an inquiry on exec@isp.edu. So my colleague Saiti will also share the coordinates, or else you can reach out us to on a toll-free number as well. So the deadline to apply for this is basically as the program is starting on February 2. So we are taking applications on a rolling admissions on a first come first serve basis. So the moment you fill the application forms, it will be reviewed by the panel, and then your application is shortlisted, and you'll be getting an offer letter accordingly. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
If you have any program related questions, you can drop them in the chat box. Nupur was asking if the participants will get to work with any mentor directly. Would you like to take that question, Bakshi?
So not directly you will get, I mean, definitely, but you will, if you have some questions, so we have faculties as well. So we have mentors also, and definitely you will be able to, clarify all your doubts with the faculty and even the program managers as well.
I've dropped the program link in this chat box. You can all explore it by clicking on the link. And we have a question again by Nupur. What is the selection criteria?
So thanks for asking this question, Nupur. So the selection criteria is you have to fill up your application form. Your application form will be reviewed by the panel. And once your application form is accepted, so accordingly, we'll be rolling out an offer letter.
Sure. So our team will get in touch with all of you individually. And in case you have any more questions about the program, you can always ask us when we reach out to you individually. There's another question in the Q&A section. Anukriti is asking, what is the fee of the program?
The fees of the program is 3 lakhs plus taxes.
Sure. I've dropped the coordinates of our coordinates in the chat box. Please feel free to contact us through the toll-free number, or you can also write to us on the email ID given below. Well, I think that's it. We don't have any more questions from the audience. Well, thank you everyone for being a part of this masterclass, and thank you for being such active audience. Thank you, Professor, for the masterclass, and for the interactive session that you've conducted. And thank you, Abhishek, for walking us through the program.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.